we now as a sort of, you know, anti-woke movement, I don't even know if it's conservatism or rightism or whatever anymore. It's basically like woke versus anti-woke. It's like, are we going to be constitutional and liberty oriented, or are we going to be, take from one to give to others oriented, which is what the left is all about right now. Doesn't matter. We have to figure out our own way forward. And right now we are back in this position of being sort of insurrectionists. I mean, not to use the word that they're using, but like it's an insurgency within this whole apparatus that has the corporations, institutions, university, the government, deep state. Now the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate all working against us. And so the future is sort of a long way away when you think about it like that. How long did it take for the left to get into the position that they're in now, which is to say total cultural hegemony, right? Total domination of the universities, total domination of our institutions, total domination of our technology corporations. It took them decades to get there. We're really far behind, man. So like, what do we do right now? What do we do in the long term? What is Christopher Rufo doing? What are the people around you doing? Like, understanding these circumstances, and it's a long road ahead. Like, what's the next step, man?
Yeah, I mean, it is a long road ahead, and I think we have to trace, as you've done, the long road behind. And it took 50 years, essentially. So in, 1968, 1967, you had the kind of first iteration of wokeness. You had kind of wokeness 1.0 in the kind of coming from the beat culture, coming from hippie culture, coming from the anti-war movement, coming from the kind of neo-Marxist, from the Europeans who had come over after World War II. But at that time, the institutions were controlled by people who had fought and won in World War II. They were controlled by the greatest generation, who had a visceral understanding of both the evils of communism and fascism, and then also the blessings of American society. And they were able to hold those kind of under 30s in check through the 1960s. And a lot of people forget in the 60s and 70s, you had hundreds of political bombings. You had hundreds of airline hijackings throughout the 1970s before they had a kind of security protocol. You had political murders. It was to the next level to what we're seeing today. So on one hand, we shouldn't catastrophize. On one hand, we've been through this before, and we emerged from it. But on the other hand, it's quite different because, as you suggested, the institutions aren't controlled by our grandfathers. I wish they were, but no, they're controlled by the baby boomers who were kind of either in the 60s movement or adjacent to the 60s movement, who had absorbed all of those values. They're the people that are really now in charge. And, frankly, they're doing a terrible job. And I think there's really two ways I think that you can think about it. And you have to think about it, one, in kind of two levels. You have to think about it in the kind of, writ small, writ large, micro, macro, however you want to talk about it, kind of concrete and more abstract. On that kind of micro level, you need to basically, as an individual, as a family, as a network of friends, as a community, as a kind of your closest relationships, figure out where you fit in this new world, right? And for me, and I imagine a lot of us are feeling this way, as saying, okay, I've lived in San Francisco, I lived in DC, I lived in Los Angeles, I've lived in Seattle for the last 6 years. And at the beginning of this year, I said, that model isn't working anymore for a lot of reasons. I'm actually going to kind of move to a small town, a rural community with my family. That's been the best decision I've made all year by far, because the political dynamics were already changing even 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And you need to be very honest with yourself. Where do I fit in? Where can I flourish? Where can I thrive? Where can I be, at home? So I think you're seeing a lot of that happening right now. You're seeing a huge reshuffling. And I think more conservative people in those blue cities and states are now fleeing to places like Florida, Texas, Idaho, Wyoming, all these different places. Montana is having a huge influx, where people are sorting themselves out where they can kind of live, to the best of their ability in their immediate term. Second, though, you have to think about the big picture. And you have to think about what's happening politically, what's happening nationally. You've seen the rhetoric from the people like the Squad. I mean, it's pretty scary stuff. It's not that they want to, have, a kind of British style NHS that provides, healthcare. Yeah, they say that. That's part of it. But what they're talking about now is really a campaign of political vengeance. And they want to basically stamp out not only the president, but they want to stamp out the entire movement behind him. They want to stamp out all of the kind of conservative intellectual infrastructure. And we have to fight back against that. I don't think that we can necessarily fight back against that very strongly from kind of, living in Brooklyn and, making a podcast or whatever. But I think that marshaling the power within the states, within the jurisdictions that are red cities and counties and states, we can create a kind of counterbalance. And I think what we need to do is really work with those red state areas and legislatures to create a contrast where we say, we live this way, these are the outcomes. Other folks live this way, these are the beliefs and these are their outcomes. And I think that the more we can create that contrast, the more that we can actually live by example, we can demonstrate through evidence that this is actually just a better way to live. We can attract people to our cause, not through fear, which is an important tool, let's be honest, but also through the demonstration of excellence. And that's really, I think, like what we need to cultivate both as individuals, but also as communities and as a society, is a commitment to excellence, because excellence is the antidote to equity. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like either we're all kind of dumbing things down, we're going to that lowest common denominator, we're willing to tear people apart in order to assure a kind of baseline of equity, is kind of a calling to the lowest in a lot of ways. Whereas the call to excellence is a call for everyone, whatever your background, to actually try to move upward. And I think that's the kind of orientation that we need to have looking forward the next few years.
Yeah, man, living by example and leading by example is a very honorable and time-tested way of doing things. Problem is sometimes you're not in a fight with honorable opponents. And I can hear people in my head right now saying that we sound soft and we're not going to, take the necessary steps in order to win. But you have to have a multi-pronged approach. And so let's just be clear. Whenever Christopher and I are talking about like what should we do, we're just talking about like one part of a bigger plan, right? Like with the liminal order, we're focused on the values that we believe in, that we think would make for a best kind of family or individual, family, community, and eventually a nation. And so we're living that out, right? We're doubling down. We put up a perimeter, and we're focused on our values and ourselves and building the power of our network. That's only one part of it, right? And there's so many elements that need to be enacted in order to have a success. So, for the critics who are listening to us, we're like, oh, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. Yeah. There's a lot of things that we have to do, but there's some things that we can all do individually, and there's some themes that we can adopt as well. But as you were talking, I was trying to think about like what was different this time between now and the 60s. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is that in around the 1960s, and I talked to Matt Stoller, and this is in his book Goliath, quite detailed, is about there was a conscious decision by the Democrats to exclude the working white class from their party, and they wanted to become the party of the disaffected, of the women, of minorities, of the LGBTQ, even though it wasn't called that back then. That was a very conscious decision that they made, and so that has now really separated us in a way in which we're not just discussing different tax policies or different ideas on mundane politics. We're really talking about different systems of justice now. We're talking about a system in which we provide for liberty on our side, or where liberty is taken and then distributed to other people on the other side. And these ways of life are they don't jive. And so we're entrenched in a way that I don't think that we were in the past. And then the second thing that is different is that the tech tyranny is here. Yeah. And we're reaching a point where, as John Robb has explained very eloquently on my podcast here and elsewhere, that we're reaching a point in which the technology is going to become so powerful that there is going to be a moment, a tipping point, at which the techno tyranny is almost unstoppable. And whoever is in control of the algorithms, whoever is in control of the AI, whoever is in control of all the resources that it takes in order to run a communication software or social media network, all those are controlled by the same people. And one day that power is just may become so great that it's just going to switch, and no one else will be able to come up. It's sort of like a monopoly on tyranny, and they will have it. So it does feel like the pressure is a little bit hotter, a little bit more intense right now. And when you listen to the left's rhetoric, it is alarming, man. It is alarming. We have sitting politicians using words like evil, like the MAGA people are evil, and they're seditionists, and they're rebellious, and they're revolutionaries. They won't use that word, insurrectionists. And when you start using language like that,
Jimmy Kimmel, I saw a tweet. He said something, I'll paraphrase, like, we need to cut the cancer out of our society.
Oh.
I mean, those are like, those are like eliminationist terms, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second, because I know there's a lot of people who are worried. I mean, I'm worried. When I listen to the rhetoric, I'm worried. Years ago, I laid out case for the liminal order, which was, all of these factors we're talking about. They're 10 times worse now.
I know.
And then January 6th was like giving our enemies carte blanche. They have like a total mandate from their side to just go bonkers. And I'm afraid, actually, that at some point, the only limiting factor on the left is going to be somebody on the left. Somebody on the left is going to have to say, seriously, like, no, we can't kill them. Right? Like at some point, somebody's going to have
we really
to
appreciate it.
Right? But like,
I know.
Who is it going to be? Where does the rhetoric of the left take us right now?